So good day, and let's talk about our next plant family. And this is going to be a very, very important family as far as people is concerned. One of the main reasons for that is because the following family is going to have a lot of medicinal plants or plants that have traditionally been used for medicinal purposes by people, but also because plant family is going to give us a lot of the spices. So for many years and throughout human history, the need for spicing and making our food taste better has been sought out by people for many years. And so we do have the spice route in time when people used to go to the east, the Spice Islands, which is Indonesia, and they used to bring back the spices into Europe, where then people would enjoy the different flavors as well as because of the lack of refrigeration, maybe they had to mask some of the flavors of not so good food. But spices and making your food taste good has been very important for people. And so we can thank the Lamiaceae or the mint family as the member of the plant group that is going to give us that. And so here's the image of a few years ago when we created an herb garden, herb garden or a herb garden that has different types of herbs, either for medicinal purposes or for culinary uses. And so the concepts of the kitchen garden is going to become very important right here. And so with that, we are going to talk about the Lamiaceae, or the old family name, Lavitae. And it's going to be the mint family or the sage family or the dead nettle family, depending on which plant you want to refer to. And when we see the map, we see it distributed throughout the world. So there's going to be members of these families in all over the world, except for the very dry Sahara or some of the higher mountains. But otherwise, it's going to be well represented throughout. Dicot is going to be 236 plus species and about genera and about 7,000 plus species. We will see only the ones that are important to humans and or the ones you may come across around here. And so here's a typical market scene where we have a few plants. We have on the far left your common sage, that is a member of the mint family. We also have the rosemary, that is part of the mint family. We have the marjoram, which is part of the mint family. We have thyme, which is part of the mint family. We have the very important basil, which is part of the mint family, and it goes on and on and on. And if you also look just as something simple as the Italian seasoning, which constitute the seasoning for the pasta and or the pizzas, it has oregano, which is in the mint family. It has basil in the mint family, marjoram, sage, and well, garlic is not, but the previous ones are. And so even this Italian spices in the cooking are going to be highly dependent on members of this family. So very, very important. And here we have some of the components that a lot of the members tend to share. And so here we have several different sages, and we have the leaf of how diverse some of these groups are going to be. So pretty much for a very, very long time, it was known that sages had simple leaf and they have opposite leaf arrangement and they had a square stem. So those three characteristics would put you very closely to the mint family, and or it would be very simple to look at a plant and determine whether it was member of the mint family or it was closely related or even a sage. So those were characteristics that people used in the past, and they still hold true, but not entirely, not all the time. And so here is what I was talking about. So when you cut a square in half, you're going to see somewhat of a square stem, kind of classic of the sage. I mentioned the opposite leaf arrangement. So we have two leaves with two nodes, and then we have simple leaf. So those three characteristics are going to be standard. And so here's the leaf from three very different group members of these groups. So they're all we're going to be simple and simple leaf with nothing more than the petiole and the blade. And like everything else, there was always the one member that tends to not follow the rules and be the rebel of the family, and that would be the Cedronela Canariensis, which is uh, a plant in the mint family that had compound leaves, or leaves that were divided. And so now this one did not want to play by the rules, and so this one was the only member of the family that had leaves that were not simple. So this is something used for uh, to ward off mosquitoes. Citronella, I think it's sometimes used, or the name. So the essence of citronella is extracted from this plant. And so here's the flowers for that individual. And so when we look at the flowers, we are going to see something very unique. We're going to see usually trumpet-like flowers. So where the petals have fused together into creating some kind of trumpet-like shape. And so flowers may be given in a flower cluster. And so here we have different angles for flowers that are going to be typical of the sages, which is going to be a very typical plant from this group. And so when we look at the flowers for several members, we're going to see flower buds. The flowers for the sages are going to be known as bilobate, which means two lips. So what happens is that there's a fusion of the petals that are going to have create the upper lip. And then there's going to be other fusions of some more petals that are going to create the bottom lip or the lower lip, as you can also see with this blue sage right here. And then protruding outside the upper lip is going to be the stigma, because that's where the pollen is to be deposited. And somewhere inside is going to be the stamens. So this is going to be kind of the typical flower for the mints. And then we have the sepals that are going to be partly fused here, green, that are going to be important for the plant and the flower buds when it's in the bud stage. And you can see here where the sepals are playing and doing their part in protecting the flower as it develops. And then when we look at our Teucrium or the germander here, we have the bottom lip. So we have the three petals that form the bottom lip. And then we see the two that are not fully fused. So we don't see the upper lip here as well developed, but we see the petals, and then we see the stamens, and then we see the branch style right here. So we have the stigma and then the style that branches. And so we have a typical flower for the member of this family. And so here is just other photographs. The side view of a flower with the upper lip and the lower lip. Remember, bilobate, two lips, and or the face view here. And then here's where I cut the flower in half so that you can see the reproductive structures. So you have the stigma, the style that leads to the ovary, and still see the sepals, and then the stamens and the upper and the lower lip. And then the ovary and or the fruit are going to be known as a schisocarp. And a schisocarp is defined as an ovary that at maturity is going to split up into seeds, individual seeds. And so that's what we have here. Here's where the ovary is kind of immature, so it's still together. But when they mature, then we have each one separated from the other. and it's going to be known as a nutlet for general descriptions. But the fruit itself is going to be a schizocarp. It started with a compound ovary that had one stigma, but then as it matured, it just naturally split into four different nutlets or four different pieces of fruit, and that is what's known as the schizocarp. And so when we look at a close-up, here we have the nutlets. So we have the sepals, and there's as the nutlets are maturing, and this is where I remove the top, the flower components, and I'm showing you the lateral view, and here's the upper view, and there's where the nutlets have already fallen, and you can see where they would be attached to the receptacle of the flower. So again, this would be something that is going to be common among the many members of this family group. So we'll see this for nutlets as the fruit, the schizocarp, for members, other members of this family. And then the other thing that is going to be common among them is going to be a pseudo world. And that's going to be this area that is going to be have a inflorescence, so it's going to be flower cluster with many blossoms coming from one point. And so the bracts or the sepals are going to remain, and in many cases, in many members of this family, the bracts are going to be the showy component. Whereas the petals may be gone in a few days, the bracts can remain attached to the flower for many weeks. And so this pseudo world, this bracts attached to the flowers cluster, is going to be something common among members of this family that we'll see. And here we can see with the common lion's tail, we can see the pseudo world that is going to be very large. And so those are the sepals back there, and the flowers already fading. And pollination for many of them are going to be hummingbirds, and that's going to be the individuals native to California. So yes, when people want to bring hummingbirds into the garden, they can plant a lot of sages because those are going to be pollinated by birds, either the African honeybee birds or the hummingbirds here in America, or the Australian honeybirds as well. And so here is blue uh, blue curls, woolly blue curls that has a hummingbird, different angles as it was feeding on the flower, and I was able to take all these photographs. And so here is the hummingbird. And so when you look at the flowers, they're going to be tubular. Obviously, the beak of the hummingbird can reach the nectaries that are at the bottom, and they're not going to have a landing platform because the hummingbirds don't need that. There will be the insect pollinated like the rosemary that will have the landing platform, and they're going to be a lot smaller, or something like this that is going to be uh, the sage. This is Cleveland sage that has obviously a butterfly that is taking the opportunity to feed on the nectar of the flower. So yes, butterflies, hummingbirds, insect, they're all going to be attracted to members of this family. And even the monarchs here in Michoacan, so as they are waking up from their hibernation, they will rely on some members of the mint family to gather the energy and the resources to begin their flight and migration up north once again. And here's just a couple of other insects. So the honeybee, very common on the European members, as is in this, what they refer to as mountain tea, or some of the native bees on this native sage, or even some small beetles or other insects that could visit the flowers, carry the pollen, drink the nectar, and pollinate the flower as they move around. And so to make our life a lot easier, we're going to divide it into several subfamilies. Now, many of these were families at one point or another in the old treatment of botany. But as now the new genetic work has been done and it's a lot more extensive, they have now lumped a lot of these families that were in the past into just becoming subfamily of the mints. And so Viticoides was a family back in the days, and now it's lumped within uh, the mints or the Lamiaceae. So we have Viticoides here. We have Ajugoides. We have Prostanteritoides. That is going to be primarily from Australia. So that member that happened to jump to Australia then develop into this group. We have the Nepatoides or the cat mint, Scutellarides, called skull caps, and then Lamioides, which is the lamian or the dead nettle. So these are going to be the six primary subfamily that we are going to encounter here. And so we have the first one, which is Viticorioides. So the genus Vitex, often represented by trees or shrubs native to uh, different parts of the world. There's one here, Vitex mollis, from central Mexico. And then we have Vitex lucens, which is known as New Zealand chase tree. And it's around, but it's very unusual to see. This photograph is from Hornby Park in Westwood, and it's one of the nicer ones that I've seen. And here's the flowers. And so now that there has been a lot of lumping of other families into the mints, now the concept of having simple leaf is no longer valid. Now there's going to be other many members of this family that will have a compound leaves and can even grow to be big trees, which before they were primarily shrubs, but that's no longer the case. The DNA has shown that they are, in fact, belong to the mint family, or at least they came from the common ancestor, and that's why they get lumped together. And so here's the fruit, the flower for this Vitex lucens or New Zealand chase tree, which has the two lips bilobate. So here we have the three petals, not completely fused, and then we have the top petals there. And then the Vitex Trifolia, the Arabian lilac, here showing the very tiny flowers. And here's the flowers as well. Or the Vitex agnus castus, which is another New Zealand chase tree. Uh, and so Vitex viticoides, that would be the only member that you will come across around here. Now for Ajugoides, we have Ajuga, which is a genus. And so this is the type genus for the subfamily, often represented by small herbaceous plants. So here we have Ajuga that is often used in the ornamental field. And so here's the flower, and we have the five petals kind of fused. And so here we have it growing out in the landscape. And here we have it by itself with a cluster of very tiny flowers, but they're quite showy. And then we have the Clarodendron. And this will be another big shrub or big individuals, many represented in tropical countries like the Philippines. So we have a big cluster of flowers. There's some fusion at the bottom, but the flowers look more like stars. They still have the opposite leaves. They still have the simple leaf. They still have the square stem. But now the flowers are going to be much more different, or a little more different. And so here's the flowers. Again, there's no real uh, sophistication to them. And so here's just the Clarodendrum, or uh, as his name, the red one, uh, which is commonly known as bleeding heart. And when we look at the fruit, we see the four nutlets or the schisocarp. So here's the fruit. And so you can see where they are dividing because it's still immature. And so when it divides, it's going to be four nutlets or four individuals. Here's Clarodendrum speciosissimum, the red one that's growing out here in the garden. So with the flowers right there. And or Clarodendrum Quadriculare. This one is native to the Philippines. It's a very nice specimen if you ever get a chance to grow it. And so this is one that I grew many years ago here in the college. And here's what they refer to as blue butterfly bush. There's going to be many of those. And so here's why it gets its name, because it has the flowers that are going to resemble kind of like a butterfly. or something more obscure, Volcameria. This one coming from Cartou's greenhouse, nursery that sells more unusual stuff, and have not seen it in the landscape, so this would be the only place where I've seen it, and that's where I photographed it. So a different genus, and then you have Teucrium, which we've seen in class. So the germanders, here's a cat germander, or here's the Teucrium fruticans, here being used as an informal hedge. So we see it kind of nice, a nice wall, very low. And so we have the flowers very similar to the previous ones, but you have a nice landing platform, and then you have the stamens and the stigma and everything else. And so here's a flower of a darker purple individual. And then we have here another or a different Teucrium. This one coming from our garden here. And this one happens to have some really nice flowers. So the Teucriums are very diverse, and there's going to be a lot of them. But in California, we have Tricostema or Tricostema lanata, which is the blue, woolly blue curls. So here's the individuals, so you can see why they get their name. They're kind of woolly or fuzzy, and they're kind of bluish in color. And so there's the pseudo whorls with the flowers. And so this would be a very good plant if you're thinking about putting natives. It will be one of the nicest one that you can get out there. And here it is where it's mixed with a few other plants. I think this one is from Armstrong. And so there's the close-up of the flowers and those. And so then we go to Prostanteroides, which is going to be Prostantera, the genus for the Australian. So again, many years ago, one mint remained in Australia, and that diversified into many, many species still related. And so here we have the genus Prostantera, which still has similar flowers, a little bit of a tube, but also not a lot of complexity to them. Most of them will be pollinated by some kind of insect, so that's for creating a landing platform. And then here we have Procentra Magnifica, a picture coming from Santa Cruz Botanic Garden and native to southwestern Australia. And so here's the nice flowers. So you have the nice sepals in the back that are going to be very colorful. And then you have the petals that are going to be partly fused into some kind of trumpet or a trumpet shape. And then here's a close-up. And then we have Wistringia or coast rosemary, as its common name is. And so here we have the flowers, and very similar to the others because they have a similar ancestor. And there's some of the pink individuals. Or Hemiandra, again, this is from Santa Cruz Botanic Garden. It's a very nice, almost pincushion-like plant, ground cover. It merits a lot more attention than it has been given. And so here's a very nice flowers for it. So you have the 5 petals and the kind of nice trumpet shape. And there's a nice view. And so then we have the Nepatoides or Nepeta, and there's going to be the catnip or the cat mint, and it's also going to be extremely diverse. So here we have a very large one that I grew back in the days in the garden. And here's where it just gave very tall, the pseudo whorls and very tall flower spikes. And there's a very tiny flowers. And so here's an even close up of those flowers. And then within this group, we have the lavandulas or the lavenders, and very popular over time, having used by people for many years. Most of the mints will have some kind of fragrance. So there's going to be some kind of oil associated with them that will give them some kind of fragrance. And it's the same oils and or the same compounds that have helped people to treat some of their ailments, or then they have helped people to use them for several rituals, to cleanse an area, or to even ward off mosquitoes or bad spirits. And so The lavenders, the mints, all of those will have some kind of nice fragrance to them. So we have the different lavenders that are going to be very popular in the gardens. Here we have the Spanish lavender with the pseudo whorls and the flowers. And then we have the genus Asamum, which is the basil. And there's going to be a lot of perennial basils native to different parts of the world. We mainly use just one, which is important for Italian cooking. But otherwise, when you look at other cultures, they're going to have different basils that are going to be much more important to them. And they'll have different flavorings as well as different medicinal uses. So here we have the pseudo whorls for the basil. And so here's just the Italian basil with the flowers, which in most cases you don't see the flowers because you want the leaves. And so people sacrifice the flowers so that the energy can go to the leaves because that's what they're going to use for their cooking or flavoring. And so here's some of these basils with the flowers. So there's a close up of the flowers. And so here's the Italian basil, again, very important for Italian cooking. And those are the flowers for Italian basil, which in turn is going to be made into pesto, which is very important and very good if you never had it. If you had good pesto, and there's not a lot of good places around here in Long Beach that has good pesto, and if you know a place, let me know because we'll put it to the test, and I can guarantee it's probably not good. And then we have the Thai basil that is very important for the soups. So this is what you would put in your Vietnamese soup to add a little bit of flavoring and kick it up a notch because it does impart a very good flavor into the soups and or any meals. And then the basil seeds are going to be used very similar to the chia seeds. So they are going to absorb the water and they're going to have this mucilaginous covering that you can eat. And it's very healthy and people have been eating them for years. So here it's not uncommon to see them in drinks with different flavorings. Throughout in Southeast Asia, they eat it a lot. And then we have the genus Plectranthus, which is also very popular in ornamentals. This being the skunk bush because it does have a very strong fragrance, very similar to the stench of skunk. Other people say, no, it smells more like marijuana. I don't know, smell it and then you can tell me. Sometimes known as lobster flower, it's another common name. So it's because of the pseudo whorls and the bracts and even the flowers, which are kind of nice. And so here's a variety that's a little bit yellowish in color, a selection for that different color and goes well with that. And so here's the flowers for that. And even almost pure white or variegated individual. So this one has just a little bit of green, but we see a very nice cream margin around the leaves. So this is a variegated form of that Plectranthus, and there's a close-up. And some of the taller ones. So here's some growing here in Long Beach that can grow taller than a human. And so there's the flowers for that. Or Plectranthus cylindricaceous. This one is known as Cuban oregano. And yes, the leaves can be used for cooking. It does bring the flavor similar to oregano. And so that's why it is used. Or Plectranthus esculentum, which means edible. And this is known as the African potato mint. So African potato mint. And in Africa, for many years, this was part of the staple diet. Later on, when the South American potato was introduced into Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world, then this one became less important, became more of a local area food. But this potato mint will have a tuber, an underground stem that will be storing energy and will be storing starch. And so what we have here is kind of the beginning where I grew the plant, and you have this beginning of a nice tuber. And so for many, 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 many years, the people of Africa were eating and depended on this plant as a source of food before the introduction of the South American potato, which was bigger and obviously has more calories. But mints have been used for eating or for sustaining people as well many years ago. And then we have the Swedish Ivy, which is the ornamental that everybody loves. Everybody has had one. And so here's the flowers for that. For the Plectranthus, here's some more of the variegated form. And a couple more of the purple leaf with pink flowers have become really popular and people really want them. Or Plectranthus cutuloroides, the flavenero or coleus as it is known. Here is growing with flowers, obviously not that important. And then we have Perilla, another member of this family that is also very important as an herb. So people from Southeast Asia eat it all the time as part of their regular diet. And so it helps to feed the people or give them calories. And so it is added to soups and stews and or in salads. And so that's another edible form that you can try. Back to California, we have Lepicinia called pitcher sage. It would be native to some of the mountains around here. So the Santa Monica Mountain does have this as a plant native to the area. Very nicely fragrance. So there's the face of that. And then we have another Lepicinia here from Baja. This one having much more colorful leaf. And then we have the genus Salvia, which is probably the biggest one of this group for the sages. So these are going to be the true sages. The genus Salvia here being represented by the Mexican sage that was growing in the garden for many years. There's a pseudo world and the white flowers. And there's some pseudo worlds with purple flowers. Once again, the pseudo worlds are going to be the showy portion. The flowers will fade off and go away. Here's the hot lips sage because it has red and white. So there's the photographs for this. Or the scarlet sage that we'll get to see later on. Here being displayed at a agriculture fair in Florida. And then we have Salvia munci, native to Baja California. It may make it into San Diego County, maybe, but it's definitely south of the border. Here's where I was able to take some photographs from a wild or several wild populations of them. And then we have some sages as far down as Central and South America. So here is the Chapa Sage, tropical, not drought tolerant, but it's going to have some of the nicer or even almost a blue flower, which is very unusual to see in many plants. Or the more popular white sage, Salvia apiana. So here's a very nice plant, San Quintin, Mexico. And here's the white flowers for the white sage. And just an assortment of other sages with the flowers. So on the top left, Salvia Canariensis. Middle top is going to be Salvia macrophylla. And then the top right is going to be Salvia discolor with almost purple black flowers. Bottom left is Salvia tubiflora. Bottom center is going to be Salvia munci, and bottom right is going to be Salvia mellifera, or the black sage, also to California. And here's the hummingbird, as mentioned. Many sages will be highly, highly attractive to some kind of hummingbird in our area or birds in different areas. So here is the pineapple sage that is being visited by a hummingbird. And here's Salvia brandigi, and this one I was able to find a population in Baja California, and it was recorded as the southernmost population of its species. So this is out of San Quintin, Mexico, and I was a person who came to it first and found it. And so here's the white flower for this individual. So Salvia brandigi. So southernmost population was discovered by me. And then here's just a flower of the common garden sage, Salvia officinalis, the one that is used for cooking or traditionally used for cooking, for your pot roast and or your holiday meals. And there's the flowers, very nice. Most people never really get to see the flower, but when it does, it is going to be a very nice plant. Or Salvia miltorrhiza, and this is a Chinese sage, and it is going to be very important for Chinese medicine. So this is grown for the roots. So obviously we'll sacrifice the plant when it's ready, but it is the roots that have medicinal value and that is used for traditional Chinese medicine. So Salvia miltorrhiza, and then Salvia Columbari, that is going to be the Chia, which is an annual plant native to Southern California. And Long Beach and many areas around here would have been covered with this plant at one point or another. Here's a picture from Baja California with several other natives. So here's the flowers for that. And so this is the Chia as we know it. However, Salvia columbari is the California native or the North America. The chia that you get for food from the markets is Salvia hispanica. So this is a Mexican or Central American plant. It's much, much bigger. And yes, this is commercially grown for the seeds to be placed in a packet and sent out for the people who are thinking about having a healthier diet. They recommend you eat chia. Can you harvest and eat the chia from Salvia columbari, which is the Northern American one? The answer is yes, but your return is going to be a lot less because there's going to be smaller plants. You're not going to have as higher yields of the schizocarp or the nutlets as the Salvia hispanica that we see right here in the picture. So what happened here is that I took the chia seeds from the packet, I broadcasted them on the ground, and they germinated, and that's how I got some of these photographs to record the actual flower from the chia plant or the chia sage, which is Salvia hispanica. And obviously those are going to be the chia seeds that you find from the local market. And so here's just an assortment of other sages that you may come across from the nursery. So very popular, and here's some in the landscape, just showing you the color and why people like them and plant them because they are going to be extremely colorful. Once again, it's the pseudo whorls that are purple right now. The flowers have faded and are gone. And here's Salvia Cleflandi as it was growing at the other campus in some of the wash by the faculty parking lot. And there's the flowers for that individual. And just a few more Salvia sages that you may come across, and including our Salvia Namibenses. So this is from Namibia, and it's very unusual to find. So I think we have the only one in Long Beach. We got it from the Fullerton Arboretum, and so ours is very happy. So Salvia Namibenses, so Namibian sage, and there's the close-up with the flowers. And then we have the rosemary. So the upright rosemary, that is obviously good for cooking, but also highly used in ornamentals or in the garden. So there's the flowers for the rosemary with its natural pollinator, which is going to be a bee. So it has a perfect flower, perfect size for the bee to land and drink the nectar. And then we have Monarda. Here's from Florida. Here's the pseudo whorls with the bracts and the flowers. And so here's the individual flowers for this mint. And here's a native wasp that happens to be probably the true pollinator for this individual. So we have here some of the more ornate ones that are now out there. So this is now available. And so is this. So they're called uh, mints. And so here's the other one. And couple more photographs of this. And in the landscape where some people have planted it, there's just nice flowers for this individual. Or we have Monardella, and this is another California native to the mountains. And this one is called or named Coyote Mint. And it smells very nice. It's pollinated by hummingbird. And the size of the flowers compared to the other plant is going to be gigantic flowers. So it has to, again, it has to make sure the hummingbird finds the flowers. So it's going to spend a lot of money. It's a little bit more unusual to find. So if you find one, do grab it because it is a very nice plant. But once again, it's native to the mountains in California. So it might be not too happy here by the coast. But it's worth it if you want to give it a shot and get it to flower. Or we have Prunella that is commonly known as heel all. That is because it has been used for medicinal purposes to heal just about everything. And it's a mint, so it does have some healing compounds. Here it is growing in the wild in, I think this is Brazil. And here's just where I took some of the photographs from the wild, which is a very, very nice looking plant. And then we have hyssops, officinalis, which is also used as medicinal. This is when I grown it here for a couple of years ago, showing you the flowers. Or we have oreganum, which is going to be the oregano, the European oregano. This is the ornamental, so not edible, grown primarily for the cutie flowers. It kind of looks like hops, so it has a bracts, and inside we have the very tiny flowers. And so here is the ornamental ones that is often sold in different nurseries throughout Southern California, not edible. Or we have this one that is the edible form. So we know we have Greek oregano, we have Italian oregano, we have Spanish oregano, and we even have Mexican oregano. It's the same thing. So just different selections and different likings of people for the flavor. But it's all oregano and it all have their origin in the Mediterranean or in Europe. And so we have here some different forms with the respected flower, very small. Here's what they refer to as marjoram, which is another oregano. And here's where they have used it as a ground cover. So it does make a good ornamental plant. And here's in a container being sold as a herb with some of the flowers right there. And here's where it was growing out of the container or out of the flower bed with the flowers right there. But if you want to talk about Mexican oregano, then we need to talk about Poliomyntha because the genus Oreganum that we saw earlier, that's European. However, in America, we have Poliomyntha, which has a fragrance and a spice very similar to the oregano. And so it was a natural transition that when the European plant was brought over, since the people in the Americas already had a flavor for that, they were able to transition to the European plant very, very quickly. And so Poliomyntha is still available. I've seen it in the landscape, but most people are not going to use it as an herb, as a herb. But when you use it, you dry it out. And if you use it on many dishes, it does have a nicer oregano flavor. So if you have not had it, I would recommend that you find it. I can tell you where there's a couple of plants growing so you can go ask for a piece and dry it out and then use it. But Poliomyntha is the true Mexican oregano or the native plant to the Americas that taste and smell just like oregano from Europe. It has a nicer flower and it's hummingbird pollinated. And then we have the genus Thymus or Thymus, which is the thyme, here being used as a ground cover or part of the kitchen garden. So you can go out there, harvest some branches and use them in your cooking. And so here's the flowers for the thyme, very small. And here's even a variegated thyme. Here's some of the ground covers being used in between stepping stones. And here's some of the nicer flowers, or very nice flower displays for those. Here's a lemon thyme, as is referred to. And here's where it was just growing out of its container with hundreds of flowers. And then we have the genus Mentha, or the mints. We have peppermints, we have mints, and we have all kinds sort of plants. So here's the flowers for peppermints. So very, very nice. And here's the chocolate mint. And so here's the apple mint. And then we have Melissa officinalis, which is the lemon balm, and also used for medicinal purposes. Make a tea out of it when your stomach's not feeling well. It's good for you. And there's very tiny flowers that are often hidden because they're not as showy as the thyme or some of the other members. And so that takes care of the Nepatoides, which is a big one. Now for Scutellarioides, we're going to look at Scutellaria, which is skull cap. And this one is the native skull cap. So this is a photograph from the native plant that I took from Griffith Park. Very unusual to find. But here's some of the ornamentals. So they merit a lot more attention, and I've hardly seen them in the landscape. But once I saw this one at South Coast Botanic Garden, I can definitely see some potential there. So here's hundreds of flowers. So very, very colorful, very nice mountain shrub. And here's where every once in a while it's available in the nurseries. But again, it merits more attention. People don't really use it as much, and they should, because it's a beautiful plant. And so there's the flowers for this skull cap. And then related to this is Omsicoidea, commonly referred to as Chinese hat for a lack of a better common name, because the bracts, I guess, kind of have the same shape. So we have the bracts and then the petals and the trumpets. And so here's a very nice plant. This is a tropical shrub, kind of climbing. And there's the flowers. Here's a kind of peach color right there. And here's one that is kind of bluish in color, or purplish in color, and not as trumpet shape. So that's Cutleris. Now Lamioides, the dead nettles. And so here represented by Lamium or Lamium, which is the dead nettle. So we have some of the smaller flowers, these being more of an invasive species or a weed, and there's the tiny flowers that are going to be kind of trumpet shaped. And then we have here the dead nettle that is used in ornamental. So this is Lamium maculatum, means spotted. Very common, very popular. When it flowers, it's also very, very attractive. So here we have the leaves with the flowers. And then we have here Lonuras. So this is growing wild at Fullerton Arboretum, which is going to be a very nice plant. And I wish I had a chance to grow it. But here's the flowers for this very nice plant. And here's a close up of that, and even closer up of that. And then we have Phlomis, Jerusalem sage. Here's a yellow form that we may come across. So Phlomis from the Middle East, and here's some of the pink forms, so different species. And then Stachys, or the lamb's ears. When in flower, they are going to be very nice. Also, when they are not in flower, they're going to be very nice. So here's how the flowers would look if you happen to grow them long enough for them to develop that flower. And then we have here Stachys, or the dead nettle that is native to California. So here in our chaparral, coastal sage scrub, if it's nice shady area on the side of the hills, you may see this one that will be growing out there. And most of them are going to be visited by bees. Or we have the genus Cedronela, which is the mountain tea. And these have their origin in the Mediterranean, so around the Greek area, around Italy. They're called mountain tea, or also iron tea, because you drink the tea out of this means that you're going to be very healthy and very strong like iron. So once again, The fact that it has been used for its medicinal properties for many years. That's what gives the plant its name. So iron tea would be the common name for Sideritis or Sideritis. And I've grown it here. I have the flowers. So I've grown about 3 different species of this. And so here's where it was growing in our area in the garden, and there's the perfect pollinator, perfect size, because the European honeybee would have visited this flower, this plant in Europe for many years. So here's a perfect example of the natural pollinator, and there's the flower that the bees will prefer. But in the absence of this, they'll go to whatever else is available. And here's Cedritis orthifolia. And also we have Marubium, which is the horehounds. And for many years, people use or ate horehound candy for medicinal purposes, or horehound tea for medicinal purposes. Yes, it's good. Yes, it tastes nasty, but add a little bit of sugar, a little bit of bee vomit called honey, and it's fine. You can eat it. So there's going to be many different types of horehounds. One of them is going to be considered a weed around here. Others merit a lot more attention as ornamentals, and this one being one of them, showing you just the beautiful flowers. And here's another horehound. And then we have Leonotis, which is going to be the lion's tail. Here we have it mixed with several other mints. And so here's the pseudo world with those beautiful flowers for bird pollination. And so here's the hummingbird in our garden that happens to be visiting and drinking from the nectar of the flowers. And here's around Naples Island, where it makes a very nice display of color. And there's the flowers for the common lion's tail. And then I happened to come across this variegated one, extremely variegated. It's almost completely yellow, just a little bit of green here. And there's the flowers. So I'm sure you've seen it. And it has been used for arts. So the center of these flowers are lion's tail pseudo worlds that are being made to look like a sunflower. So it's art, part of the using plants for arts, natural products, and art. And here we have a field or a very large hedge of lavender. So that's very important. We know lavender is important for making a lot of things for people, as well as for the fragrance and a bunch of other things. And so here's rosemary, the local petrol station, the cascading one, very important. Here's underneath trees, California native oaks. We have the pitcher sage, which is the California native sage. So here's a very good example of plants to put under oak trees. So pitcher sage, as well as uh, Ribes viburnifolium, which is a Calena perfume, which is a type of gooseberry. And so here's a yellow form of the pitcher sage, and there's the pseudo worlds with the flowers. And so with that, I will bid you farewell. Have a good day, and I'll see you soon.